Thank you.
Okay, so that's pretty much about the master slave configuration in Jenkins. So sometimes let's think about this. You have an infrastructure, and this is going to be your next project. What I want you to do is the same infrastructure where you have your WordPress, you have two WordPress machines, then you have two Tomcat machines, then you have one database machine, and I want you to create one slave machine also to your master database. And I would give you the steps in order to set up the slave database. Basically, what it means is when there is a change in the database, sometimes let's say your developers are making some changes, and some change request would also include you making some modification to the database also. For example, there's an option, think about Flipkart or think about any retailer. They are giving an option like prime customer. They are adding some prime customer to their application. Certain user settings would change in the database. Some of the user settings would change to prime instead of normal user. So basically it is basically you need to add a new column in the database to explain the prime usage. So based on some change that you want to make in the application, some of those changes would need change in the databases also. So each time you make some change, sometimes optionally you need to make some change in the database also. So I will come to that. So the reason why you need two database machine is, let's say you are doing a release. How you can use a single Jenkins server to do the release? Assume this is the Jenkins master and add all these machines as Jenkins slave machines. And you run the jobs inside individual slave machines. For example, you group all these machines under a label called Tomcat. You will label the machine under Tomcat. Then whatever steps the Tomcat machine need to go through, for example, checking out the code from the Git repository, building it using, and then copying the war file into the WebOps folder, all these things would be done all the machines which is running the label Tomcat. Similarly, there would be another label called web server. Probably in the web server labeled machines, what you would do is you add both machines as an slave machine into the master. Then on these machines, what you would do is maybe go to the www.html folder, check out the latest code from the GitHub. That's what you would do on these machines. So basically, you would group all the machine into a single label called web server or something. Then into the www.html folder of that machine, you will check out the code from Git. So that particular job would run on the machines which is actually running WordPress. Then on the database machines, you want to run some database migration. Sometimes you want to make some changes in the database. But there is a problem if you want to make some change in the database. Always remember this database is actually a single point of failure. So you are making some change in the database and it takes hours to complete. Sometimes it can take hours to complete in real time with the databases. Think about Flipkart. Flipkart has millions of customers and they want to save the data of all the customers. So whenever they want to add the data of all the customers, it would actually take a lot of time. It would actually maybe right, the user table would be some 100 GB in size. A single table is 100 GB in size. You want to add a new column into that table which is 100 GB in size. Maybe it can take hours or sometimes it can take days to complete if you want to add a new column into that database, because that much time it would take to complete adding all the columns into that table. And during the entire time this table would be in a locked state. People will not be able to write data. The applications, your software application will not be write any data into the database during that time, which is not really good, right? If you, it is a production database and people cannot make changes to the database, and it your entire application is throwing errors to your customers. People who tries to register inside the website, when Flipkart tries to write the user information into the database, it is not able to do so. Then it would result in an error. So like that, any database write queries would result in an error if you are doing some database migration on a live machine. So it is not a good idea to perform maintenance or any changes to the database which is live. So what you would do, what you can really do is, instead of running single database machine, you can actually run two database machine. This will be the master database machine and this will be the slave database machine. And the slave database would replicate the changes in the master through a process called replication, database replication. That means whatever change happens in the master database, it would be replicated in the slave. So at any point of time, both master and slave machine will contain the same data. But of course, whatever write queries, let's say any application want to write any data into the database, the all write would go into the master, but the slave will also replicate all those changes. Whatever changes are coming to the master, slave will replicate them. Now assume you want to make a change on the master. You are doing some release. The release would include you are enabling some prime customer option, which requires some database change. But the thing is that you don't want to make the change directly into the master database, because if you do that, that would result in a lot of problem in the application. You need to keep the application down for long time, right? Until this database migration is completed. So what you can really do is, one day before you do the release, you make changes into the slave database, run the query in the slave database, which would add the new column and make changes in the slave database. Does that make sense? And at the time of release, of course, at the same time, slave will keep on replicating the data from the master. So and into the slave, you added the new column also. So now the slave look like a database that has everything. Now, during the time of release, what you do is, now slave is up to date with the changes in the master, and also slave already got the column added. You will make the slave as the new master. What you would do is, you would point all your application server directly to the slave machine, and now the applications would start connecting to the slave database. Basically, slave would become the new master. And if you want to turn the master into the new slave, you can again do the reverse replication. You can make this as the master, then configure some mysql replication, then the master, previous master would become the slave. Or maybe you can even create multiple machines which would work as a slave to this machine. So this way you can make sure that you are not causing any problem or any downtime your software application, even if there is any database migration going on uh, during a release, which is important. So what I want you to do, one of the assignment which I want you to do is set up MySQL database replication. It's pretty easy actually. MySQL replication. Ubuntu. First, you have to set up the database. Once you set up the WordPress database, what you need to do is just take a backup of your database and restore that in the slave database. Then configure some replication. I will tell you how to do that. So first you need to install MySQL on both master machine and the slave machine, or assume the master machine is already set up with your WordPress database. You already have a database called WPDB inside the master machine, and you want to create another EC2 machine, and inside this EC2 machine you will install MySQL. Then you would configure this machine as a slave. Your original WordPress database machine would become the master. So first what you need to do is, actually there are some log files inside the master, the binary log files. What this log file contains is the database queries which made changes to the database. For example, a new user registered for a new user account into your website. What your software application does is, it would run some queries, some insert queries into database which would add the new user information to the master database. At the same time, this query which made changes to the database would be written inside a log file. So what slave machine does is, it would look into this log files, and whatever queries are found inside the log files, it would be executed on the slave. That would include all the modification being taken place in the slave database, in the master database. So basically that's how the replication will work. Whatever queries which make change to the master database. It will run on the master, and as well as the query would be recorded, and slave machine will run those queries in itself, which would, that means slave machine database would be updated with the data of the master in real time. This reading this log file will happen in real time. So what you need to do is, first you need to install, set up the database in the master, and next thing what you need to do is, there would be a log file, and you need to mark a point on the log file what is the status of the replication is at this particular point. Of course, right, there are, assume there are some 10 or 15 queries in the log file, 1 2 3 4 5 6, like that. There are some 15 queries right now which is being executed in the master, and it is also recorded in the log file, which means slave also want to run those queries. So you want to set up the replication from the master to the slave. Maybe you have a database called WPDB here, and here also you want to create a database called WPDB. To this database, you want to replicate the changes happening in the master. What you do is, you will take a backup of this machine, and during the time of backup, you will make a note. What is the query which is, what position the database is running the query, the binary log position would be recorded when you take the database backup from the master. Then from this backup, you will create a new database in the slave and restore the slave with this database. And then you will tell the slave that, okay, uh, on the third position, there is a query. Till there, the query have been executed in this database backup, which is restored. So you need to resume from 4. So from this position, you have to start running the queries, because till here, whatever queries were there, that is already included in the backup. So you need to start from the 4. You need to tell that information to slave. So slave will know where exactly it need to start, because it already got the backup of the master database. But it is the backup which is restored has the queries till here, but not after that. So those position you will make a note on the master and tell that information to the slave. Then slave will start replicating from that particular position. This is how the replication would work. Musammil and Harsha, go ahead and mute yourself. Harsha, unmute yourself. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. First, you need to install MySQL on both master and slave. And in the master database, what you need to do is, first you need to comment out the bind address line, of course, because you know the reason why you want to comment out the bind address line. The reason is you want to connect from a remote machine. That's why. And server ID, you need to set it to 1. So all these changes you need to make inside the my.cnf file in the master. You will make the server ID is equal to 1, indicating that this is the master. And you should enable the binary log. I told you the bin log. So there would be a line which is commanded. You need to uncomment this line. Log bin is equal to var log mysql bin log. Basically what it means is, whatever queries are being executed, the insert or update queries in the database, those queries are actually logged inside this particular file in the master, which slave will replicate in it. So you are enabling that binary log inside the master machine by adding this entry to the my.cnf file. Then you mention to which database, or if you don't mention this, it means all databases, or you can mention which database queries need to be logged into the binary log. You can mention the database name. So whatever change happen inside this database would be logged inside this binary log. Those, so these queries are later will be executed on the slave machine to perform the replication. And you would restart MySQL on the master machine. Then you want to take a backup, right? You want to take a backup of the master machine and the database backup, and restore the database backup on the slave machine. Before that, you are creating a user for inside MySQL on the master, basically, right? Inside the master machine, you are creating a and password, user and password, using which the slave will connect to the master whenever it want to do the replication. The slave machine connect to the master using this database username and password to the master machine to do the replication. So that is why you are creating a user with permissions to do the replication. Grant replication slave. What it means is, the user which I'm going to create has permission to do the slave replication. So this is the username, this is the password. Then run this command flush privileges, and finally, so you are going to take a backup of the database. Now what you want to do is you want to take a backup of the master database, restore the database in the slave machine. Before you do that, you would flush the table with read lock. What it means is no more write queries are allowed into the database. Of course, right? In the binary log, the queries are being recorded 1, 2, 3, like that. Whatever queries being executed on the database are being recorded in the bin log. Now let's say this query has been executed and now you would run the log. What it means is no more changes are allowed into the master. You can run this command show master status to verify, to find out what position you are at right now. You are on this 107 position of this particular log, bin log. So make a note of these two values, the file name, the bin log file name, and also at what position it is 107. Till 107 queries have been executed. So this backup which I am going to take would contain the queries till 107. So slave want to start from 108. That's what it means. Okay, so you noted down this, and since you have already logged your table with read log, no more write are allowed into the table. So it would remain on 107. It won't change. That means, right, you blocked it. I mean, no, now nobody is allowed to take the database changes, allowed to make any database changes, because you locked the tables. Nobody is now allowed to do so. And then you take a look at the master status and found what is the file name and at what position. Then these details you will inform to slave. So before that, you will take a backup in the database. This is how you would backup the master database running this command in the master slave machine of MySQL. You will get a backup file, and that's it. Then you can unlock the table. Okay, right? You are ready to unlock tables. Now the position can grow. I mean, you can go to 108, 109, 110, like that. It can go because you already noted down the position when the backup has taken, which is good enough. You can tell that information to slave. I'm going to restore this database backup into the slave. Then I will tell slave that this database already contains the position till 107. You need to start from 108. So that's why I can go ahead and unlock the table. Now 108 can resume. Okay, now you log into the slave machine. You first need to create the database, the WPDB WordPress database you need to create. Now you restore the database with the backup that you have copied from the master. This backup file that you have taken in the master machine, you will copy that. I mean, this is the command you would run to create backup in the master. The backup would be saved inside this particular file. This file you need to copy to your slave machine. You can use FileZilla or WinSCP, whatever, to copy this SQL file into the slave machine. Then in the slave machine, run this command in order to restore the database, slave database. And inside the my.cnf file on the slave machine, you set server ID is equal to 2, indicating that this is a slave machine. Relay log you can enable, which would basically enable the log file inside the slave machine. Log bin you can enable in slave also. Let's say in slave also database are getting modified. You can log those modification in another log file in the slave. Then which database you want to binary log, you can mention here, just like you mentioned in the master. Then you can restart MySQL. And then what you would do is you would run this query inside the slave machine, specifying the master host, specifying the username that you created in the master who has replication privileges, the password of the user, then the bin log file and the position. All this information you would mention inside the slave machine by running this SQL query on the slave machine. Now the slave machine know that it can connect to the master machine at this particular IP with this username and this particular password, and it can start replicating the file, uh, replicating by running the queries which is saved inside this particular file, starting from the position 107. That's what this query would tell to your slave machine. Now the slave machine would start replication. Now we can run this command start slave, which would actually start synchronizing the data from the master to the slave. Now what you can really do is you make some change in the master, run this command show slave status to make sure that the slave is working fine, and you can see that it is looking good. Now whatever change database change that you make in the master will be automatically replicated to the slave machine. So this is how you can replicate the database uh, replication in MySQL. So I want you to do this, and this is the reason why you would want to do is you do not want a single point of failure for your database, right? You have a master and you need multiple slave machine that can replace master at any point of time if there is a problem, or also at the time of a release you want to make some database change. It is not a good idea to make change into the live database. Instead of that, you would make changes into a slave database. Then at the time of release you would change your master machine to the slave would become your new master. So this way you can avoid any inconvenient problems that can happen on a database which is actually a single point of failure. So sometimes what people does is they will create multiple slave machine. There would be a single master and multiple slave machine. That is also possible. You can actually create multiple slave machine. They all will replicate from a single master. So whatever change that you make to the database, the master will get the changes. The write queries would execute on master machine. The root queries can be executed on any of these slave machines because all machines will contain the same data. So if you want to read any data from the database, either you can read from the master or you can read from any of the slave machines. All machine will contain the same data. But when you want to write some data, you should write into the master database. Got it? So I want you to do this. Just do this, complete this database replication. uh, Set up a slave machine and make sure that whatever change that you're making in the master database, its slave is also replicating those changes. Okay, so that's that's it. So let's come back to the Jenkins. So this is what I want you to do. What I want you to do is create a infrastructure and build a deployment pipeline. Your infrastructure will contain two Tomcat machines, two Apache machines, two database machine. One is master and other is slave. So add all these machines as a node into Jenkins, slave node into Jenkins through SSH. Both Tomcat machine you create, add it as a label called app server. The WordPress machine you create it as a label called web server. The database machine you create under a label called DB service. Create jobs that would run on individual labels, right? One job you would inside Jenkins would run on all your Tomcat machines, which would actually which will actually um, yeah, I'll let it be, which will actually do all these steps. Check out the code from git, build using, and then deploy the war file into web apps folder, and create another job inside this label. It would run inside the web server label, which would actually go to the var www.html folder, check out the code from the git repository into the var www.html folder, the WordPress changes in the PHP scripts, and create another job which would actually connect, which would actually run on the label DB service, which will in fact make some database modification, whatever queries that you, whatever modification that you want to do, maybe whatever query that you want to do, put that inside a job which would actually execute on the database machines. Maybe you need to create two labels, DB slave and DB master, and create individual job that can run in individual database machines. So, and all these job would work together. For example, first you would do this deployment, web server deployment job, you will run it. And if this job is successful, it would start the downstream job app server. And if this is also successful, it would start the other job DB server. So that is what I want you to do. I will show you how to do that, how to create a upstream and downstream job in Jenkins. You can, yeah, I'll show you. So go to your Jenkins dashboard. I already have a project. And let's say this, I'm going to make this as the upstream project. That means I am running this project, which would actually, in fact, initiate some other project. You can build now to make sure that it is building correctly. I think I have set the job to run on the slave machine. Probably that's why it is failing. Let me set it to run on the master. I want this job to be running in the master only. So I mentioned master here. I think this time it should work. Try to build it now. Click on build now. It's taking too much time. Okay, it is not able to deploy to the remote Tomcat container. The reason is the IP address of the Tomcat container has changed. I'm going to change the IP address of the Tomcat container from the Jenkins job or here. It's doing the remote deployment through the remote to container plugin, right? So it has the old IP address of your Tomcat machine. Since I stopped and started Tomcat machine, it does not have the new IP. I have changed that. Now let's see. I'm going to abort it. I will run it again. I'm going to run it again. Creates error. There is some error. Not sure. Let me try once again. So just making sure that it has the correct IP. It end with 214. That's correct. Let me try again. I think Tomcat is not running. I have to start Tomcat. Let me start Tomcat on the app server. Yeah, it's working now. Cool. Okay, so what I want to do is, if this job has successfully run, if this job successfully executed, then I want to start a new job. That's what I want to do. What I can really do is, I can create a new job. Click on new item. Maybe downstream job, downstream project, freestyle. Click on OK button. Maybe what I want to do is, I want to simply, let's say, build trigger. I would mention build after other projects are built. Now select the project which you want to watch. What is that? I already have a project called my new project. So what it means is, if I select that project, what it means is, if this project, my new project, executed successfully, then this new project would start executing. Maybe whatever you want to do, you can mention over here. Maybe here I am simply putting something. Echo. This is a downstream project. If you see this message, it means my upstream project, my new project is successfully ran. So I put some message here. That's it. Click on save button. So now what I want to do is, I want to execute the first project, my new project, which is the upstream project. So go to your downloads folder, or I mean, go to your Jenkins machine, log into Tom's computer. This is Jenkins server. I'm going to log into Tom's computer. Right? You need to make some commit, right? Then only it would start. He's going to make some change, echo something, readme, right? Git add, readme, git commit, fn, changes in readme. Then you are doing the push. Git push origin development. Run this command, which would do the push, and automatically you can see that a job got triggered. Which job will get triggered? This one, my new project. It will get triggered, and once this project is successfully executed, you can see actually it is already triggered. You can see the build queue here, my new project. It already triggered, and once this project is successfully executed, then a new project would start. You can see now it is in progress. The 14th build is running. Now it triggered the downstream project. You can see the new downstream project is now being built, which was never built before. Now it is being built because the other project is successfully completed. Now if you refresh this page right now, you can see there are no previous successful project. If you refresh this page now, you can see it already got executed once. So go to this project, the downstream project. You can see there's already one build. Click on that build, you can see it is started by upstream project. This one, the build number of this upstream project is 14, and originally this build 14 of upstream project was started because Basil 1987 he did a push to the GitHub. So this information you can see. Look at the console output, you can see the message that you got how displayed. It's working fine. So this way you can make two jobs dependent. So in your case, what you want to do is first you want to try and set up the WordPress deployment. If it is looking good, then you want to start the Tomcat deployment. If that is also working, then you want to run the database queries. So this is the series of steps job that you want to perform in a downstream upstream way. By the end of the job execution, you would have your entire infrastructure deployed with Jenkins. You can do many things. Actually, this is a way of deploying your machines manually using Jenkins. Sometimes let's say you are using Chef for your deployment, right? Whenever you want to do a deployment, what you need to do is you want to run the Chef client command on individual machines. So what you can really do is create the locals and add the machines into the Jenkins as slave machines, then simply run the Chef client command on the slave machines. That's all sometimes Jenkins want to do. Then it is the responsibility of your Chef server to take care of the deployment into this machine. Maybe all these tasks that you want to do, right? Checking out the code from Git, building using AND, or all these things, or maybe the executable files which are saved in a repository. You want to install it on the client machines. All these tasks can be done using your Chef server, and you invoke the Chef server using Jenkins, right? And that is going to be your final assignment. And on Jenkins also cover the database part also, the database replication, to make sure that you have a backup. I mean, you don't really need to use the database backup for now, and but assume this is how you would use it. You want to make do a release and you want to make a change in the database. In real time, you do not really want to make change directly into the production database. You want to make change in a stage database, and later uh, make the changes, make slave as the new master after the release. That is also a practice that you can follow. So we will take a look at few of the Jenkins plugin later, after a short break. Take a short break of 5 minutes. We will continue. We will see some other important plugins in Jenkins that would be helpful, and then we will wind up with Jenkins and start with our new topics, Puppet and Ansible. So take a short break of 5 minutes and we will continue. So now we will take a look at few in fingerprinting of the build file which Jenkins create. Also, we will take a look at the backend. I'm going to log in as the user Jenkins, and if you type ls command, you can actually see different files inside that. One of them is workspace. There's a folder called workspace. If you go inside that folder, type ls, you can actually see a project called my new project, which is nothing but the project that you have created, that we have created, and it is into this particular folder your git would check out the code, and it is inside this dist folder you can find the war file, and it would repeat. Actually, each time you build a project, the war file would be replaced with a new set of war files. All right, now what I'm going to do is I want to track the war file, or in generally these build file which Jenkins create. They are called artifacts or the executable code. You can call it any name. So I would generally call it artifact. These artifacts, or it can be war file, or it can be the Debian executable files. Sometimes if it is a Java project, you would use a Maven or Ant in order to create a war file or jar files. Or sometimes what you can really do is you can actually compile your source code and build it as a Debian package, which you can directly install using your apt-get command or dpkg-i command. You can install this Debian package that you have built. Or sometimes you can run the command make in order to create the binary files. So there are different ways you can build your project into some executable file, and is one of them, right? And is one build tool which you can use to create the war file. So generally it could be war file, exe file, Debian file, Debian executable file, so like that, or the compiled binaries. So all these executables, you need to track them, right? Each time the developer make a change, it would create a set of build file. Then another developer makes some different changes, and the build file would change. So a new version of the build file would change. So you want to keep a track of all the build files. Sometimes let's say you got a build file, then you want to identify from which particular build this build file was created. There's a var file that is with you, and you want to troubleshoot something. Let's say you are doing some testing, your testing team want to do some testing, they are using a specific var file, and when they tested, they found some problem. Then you want to find out in which particular build the problem has come, right? It's important to know maybe what change developers had made. You need to understand that. So you need to understand from which build this particular war file got created. So there should be some way using which you want to track all these artifacts that your Jenkins is creating. What you can really do is you can do some fingerprinting of all the artifacts which your Jenkins is creating. So go ahead and install a plugin called fingerprints. There is a plugin called fingerprints. Click on available tab, search for fingerprints. There's a plugin called fingerprint plugin. If you install this plugin inside your Jenkins, then Jenkins would start fingerprinting each and every build it is creating. It's creating a var file. It would track that var file by creating a fingerprint. The fingerprint is nothing but some hash value of a given file. For example, I will tell you what is meant by fingerprint. Let's say you have a file, then using some protocol, let's say MD5, or using some uh, non non protocol, you can create the fingerprint value of this particular file, and you got some string, you got some big string, and this string is going to be unique for this particular file. Let's say I do it from my computer, and somebody else who has the same file, he also calculated the MD5 fingerprint of that particular file, he will also get the same string. So a fingerprint is nothing but something like a signature, right? Something like uh, you calculate the MD5 of this file, you get this particular fingerprint. Anybody else in the world who calculate the same file MD5 sum, they should also get the same value. Or in other words, let's say you have a file which you fingerprint, and you got some string, some value you got here as the fingerprint. Then this send file you send to another computer, another person, and this person received this file, and again he uses the same protocol, let's say MD5, in order to calculate the fingerprint of this file, and he should also get the same string when he calculate the fingerprint. If he got a different fingerprint, what it means that these are not actually same files. Probably the file got corrupted while the file was